A lot of people talk about what it looks like to date a fearful avoidant, but nobody talks about what happens after years or what actually happens as the relationship grows and transpires. So in today's video, I'm going to break down for you what a long-term relationship with a fearful avoidant looks like, specifically if the fearful avoidant is not doing the work. Obviously, there's so many fearful avoidants that come to this channel to plug in, do the work, really dig deep into the healing. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about what it looks like if somebody doesn't do the work, maybe doesn't even know that they're a fearful avoidant, and it's just going through the motions sort of on autopilot. And then what does that general context of a relationship look like? And we'll talk about this in 4 major stages. The very first stage of dating a fearful avoidant is usually incredible. Fearful avoidants, also known as disorganized attachment styles, are usually the person in a relationship who is very present. They're very generous. They want to get to know you and understand you so deeply, and they often make you feel seen and heard and loved and deeply valued. And this means that long-term relationship partners, as they're getting to know the fearful avoidant and dating them, that first year is usually a big high. There are a lot of high highs and low lows with fearful avoidance, but they make people feel really connected. However, the closer the fearful avoidant gets to somebody, especially as that first year goes on, the more they tend to feel threatened by that connection at the same time. Because fearful avoidants usually, in their own individual conditioning, they experienced a lot of love, and love being a really good thing, but love also being a terrifying thing or a very confusing thing. And so the more they love, the more a fearful avoidant ends up having this bittersweet experience. There's a sweetness of falling in love and everything that means, but the bitterness that lingers in the background for this individual going, well, the more I love this person, the more they're inevitably going to hurt me because I've always been hurt by everybody I love. And unfortunately, and I say this with so much empathy, but a lot of fearful avoidants, they usually grow up thinking, well, if even my own family or parents hurt me and they're supposed to love me the most, well, how could I possibly trust anybody else not to betray me or hurt me or really let me down? And so fearful avoidance, literally in that first year, they go in, they come on really strong. They make people feel very seen and connected and valued and important. But then as time goes on, they start pinballing a little bit back and forth, even within that very first year. Now, of course, if somebody doesn't know that they're a fearful avoidant, that first year goes from feeling like one of the most intense loves of your life to sometimes feeling very confusing very fast. And that is because of this deep intermittent reinforcement between this profound intimacy and attunement, often followed by this intense withdrawing that takes place because they tend to feel the need to retreat to protect themselves. And the more fearful avoidants go through, getting deeper and more connected to somebody in a relationship, the more they start collecting data and information and basically just holding it very close to their chest. And they start going, maybe this person lied here, or they were dishonest here, or why did that story change over here? And they start looking for ways or reasons to believe that this person is going to hurt them. And this is them trying to prepare themselves in advance. And I talk a lot about on this channel, this analogy of a bear in the woods. Like if you go into the woods tomorrow and you see a bear and you run away from the bear and thank goodness you're safe, but you have to go back into the woods the very next day. Well, what does your brain do? Well, it's constantly bracing for the bear. You're like waiting for the bear to pop out at you any moment. And that's great if you're in this survival dynamic of trying to avoid a bear, but it's not great if in your own experiences, your version of the bear was feeling abandoned or betrayed or controlled or trapped. And so you constantly are projecting that back out onto your world and relationships instead. And this is very much what happens to fearful avoidance in the second major stage. After that honeymoon stage and that intense attraction, they start going through a lot of this push-pull dynamic where they reel you in and they don't want to be abandoned by you. But then as soon as you're close, they get threatened by that degree of closeness and they start pushing away really strongly. And often this intermittent reinforcement for somebody on the receiving end is very confusing at first, very addictive in certain cases, because there's this high of like wanting to get close again and be reeled back in. And for the fearful avoidant, there's generally this dynamic of not just it being confusing and addictive, but also it wears away at the relationship. It wears away sometimes if you're constantly being intermittently reinforced at your own sense of self-esteem and worthiness and your own sense of safety in relationships. And I don't necessarily mean by any case that if you're avoidant will be physically unsafe, but emotional safety, this sense of like, I can trust and lean in and rely on this person to be consistent and be there. And so in the second stage of relationship, really post honeymoon stage, people on the receiving end often feel confused, disappointed, addicted, on high alert. And sometimes they start feeling anxious themselves, even if they didn't start out that way. Because this chronic unpredictability changes your baseline and sometimes makes you take on a little bit of that hypervigilance yourself. And in that stage of this taking place, dating a fearful avoidant, often whenever there's this triggering event, it triggers this kind of collapse for a fearful avoidant at a nervous system level. Fearful avoidants go through this really intense inner storm when they're in the middle of a conflict, where they have this need to fight, to flee, to freeze, kind of all at the same time. And that's part of why they will say things they don't mean or shut down and push away somebody so strongly, because a lot of their own emotions are on high. And this ultimately takes us to this third stage of the relationship, which is when you're in that power struggle stage of the relationship. That usually goes on for a long time until the trust is really broken and until every single conflict that hasn't been resolved doesn't go anywhere. It instead forms this invisible wall between you and that person. And there ends up being between you and the fearful avoidant, literally from both sides, resentment, frustration, confusion, and pain, because all of that is mixed in with a whole lot of love. And usually there's a dynamic of going, well, how did we lose each other? How do we get so far away from each other in this relationship dynamic when we once loved each other and felt so deeply connected? And the reality is that that's ultimately what happens when we don't know how to navigate conflict in a relationship with somebody else. This is inevitably what takes place because conflict doesn't go anywhere. When you have a conflict with somebody, if you don't externalize that conflict and solve it in a healthy way, that conflict doesn't disappear. It just gets internalized. And every time you internalize a conflict and it doesn't get worked through, you form an invisible wall instead. And so after a few months, years of not resolving conflict, in this third stage, there's so much distance and resentment and confusion. And you have these moments usually in this stage, these moments of touching back on what that love originally was. Sometimes these sort of breakthrough moments in a relationship where you can put the conflict aside for a minute and all that resentment and all of that disconnect. And sometimes you have these moments of feeling like, oh, we found our way back to each other again. But those moments in that third stage, they become less and less frequent. And ultimately, we end up going into this fourth stage of relationship. And remember, this is if a fearful avoidant doesn't do the work. There is currently an epidemic of loneliness happening in our world. And it's being driven even more so by the fact that we now have AI. So people are just constantly seeking this high quantity of connection, but not quality of connection that happens through loneliness, vulnerability, and understanding the intricate dynamics of human relationships. And right now, for a limited time, you can actually gain access for free, for life, literally a lifetime offer. It's a gift to our Overcoming Loneliness and Building Authentic Connections course. This course will give you in-depth materials and resources to build more authentic connections, to know what makes you feel most connected to others, and to understand what makes other people feel most connected to you, and how to rewire limiting beliefs that are blocking your vulnerability or authenticity, as well as other really powerful tips for how to build connection in a meaningful way, whether it be in dating, in romantic relationships, or in friendships. This is a lifetime gift, and it comes for free when you sign up for a 7-day free trial to the Personal Development School, which also gives you access to all of our courses for 7 days. And you can join me in the webinars. You can ask me questions. We literally have live events every single day for so much personalized support. I hope you enjoy this gift. You can click the link below before the time runs out and the offer is over. And let's get back to the video. The last piece I really want to take you through here is that in that fourth stage, ultimately, as much as there's so much love and so much care, resentment takes hold and basically is the trump card, because the reality is that love is not enough unless we know how to communicate love and work through conflict and express what's going on in our own internal world. And if we don't know how to do that, we're only making room in our lives for infatuation-based love. In other words, this type of love where it's like you're excited and there's this high and you feel this sense of connection, but ultimately, real, more unconditionally based love takes place every time we work through a conflict, every time we get to know each other more deeply, every time we feel this disconnect and we express it. And it helps us actually become stronger with one another because we express what our needs are or what our boundaries might be in a situation, and we can honor each other's truth. But if all of those really important components of a relationship are missing, then what starts off as this really extreme, intense connection often just ends up kind of becoming the other side of the roller coaster. After that high, there's a really intense low. And this is why it's so important to understand that relationships should not just be infatuation-based relationships. That doesn't get us anywhere into this long-term sense of peace and stability and fulfillment. What actually does is doing the work. What actually does is learning your needs in a relationship, rewiring your triggers so that you're not triggered all the time by each other, learning how to communicate and regulate your nervous system. These are 4 major pillars of healing your attachment style that we cover in all of our different courses. And this is what ultimately moves the needle. So if you felt stuck for a long time and you want to dig deeper, you can check those things out for free down below. Of course, this channel is full of other information and videos about these topics and how to heal. And that's it for today. I hope this was helpful in shedding some light and bringing some context forth about the fearful avoidant. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join our community here, and I'll see you next time.